My name is Clancy. I'm an alcoholic. If you had a couple days to work on an introduction, and that's what you came up with. Better give it a little longer next time, Dennis. Maybe a couple months. Give her some. Very good, really. I'm very glad to be here tonight. I want to say hello to the people who have come in the last couple of days. The room is kind of full, and I especially want to give a thank you. We sometimes forget to do this. They serve coffee right beyond those doors, and they sit there and watch it on television. So we want to say hello to all you folks in the Half Measures room. Why? It sounds like someone is clicking off the TV. Son of a bitch. I want to thank Dennis and the committee for inviting me to come down here. I enjoyed being here. Wish I could stay longer. Wish I had a week to stay here. So, boys, the weather's been nice. The beach has been grand and nice to see everything. I want to thank my host, Bubba. I didn't name him. I just met him. Bubba and Beth came over out to the airport to pick me up, and Bubba Beth was along to she had the hook in his ear leading him. Oh, over here, Bubba. Oh, no. No, he really was a very good host today. He said, if you need anything, let me know, but I haven't seen him since to let him know. Did I say something, Bubba, to hurt you? Well, anyway. And as we've had a very good weekend, as has been mentioned here earlier. Good speakers. I've enjoyed them. Yesterday, Willie gave an excellent talk on the meaning of the steps and traditions, and last night Peg gave an excellent talk. And when you think about people like Cricket staying sober, you know that AA really works, because what chance do people like Cricket have, or people like Peg have, or people like me have, or people like Tom have, a manslaughter guy in a bad prison where they're just going to teach you worse things when you get out. And Don tomorrow morning, and I'm sure if you're kind of new, you think, well, these are really wonderful things. These are wonderful people. We're not wonderful people. The speakers are not wonderful people. I would dare say there are many people in this room whose recovery is more miraculous than anybody who spoke at this convention. It's just that some of these people are more verbally facile and are used to talking about it, and maybe you will someday. But AA is not confined to the speaker class. If everyone in this room is a miracle. That's what makes it such an astonishing thing. I was thinking tonight when the young lady was reading this part of chapter 5, and they talk about we must find God's will, and we find a new employer, and things all get better, and it really sounds nice, and it is nice, and it's true, but it's very, very difficult to keep applying in one's life. As I mentioned last night, the guy that wrote that was 3 years sober. He really did not have it all together, but he, and he would bring chapters down to the local meetings, and they would discuss what was in them. And so the people, in effect, who voted for that section of the book, and all the sections of the book, were the first, turned out to be 77 people who had been sober, 79 people who had been sober a year. He said over 100, because he wanted to make it sound good. He wrote that later, I didn't. But most of those people died drunk, because that's the natural state of sober alcoholics, to eventually die drunk. Most people die drunk. In America today, where there's more sobriety than any place in the history of the world, it is estimated about maybe 95% of alcoholics still die drunk, or as a direct result of drinking. I think it's safe to say a number of people in this room are going to die drunk. Maybe me, maybe you, don't know who, because it really doesn't make any difference how it looks tonight, because as this book says, and very wisely, the maintenance of our sobrieties depend upon the maintenance of a spiritual condition. And we sometimes think that means a religious condition, so we think if we can pray constantly, we won't get drunk. That's not true. They have homes, several homes, where they send alcoholic clergymen who love God and weep in frustration because they can't stay sober. and pray at length. It isn't, if we can only find God's will. I think a great example of that is a very famous author who had a searching for God's will, and he went to Gethsemane Monastery in Kentucky, and he spent 13 years in there. And he mute, studying God's will. And he came out at the end of 13 years, a brilliant, searching religious man. And he wrote a prayer that I have on the wall of my office because it tells me a little bit about myself. It says, "Dear God, I have no idea where I'm going. I do not see the road in front of me. And the fact that I think I'm following your will does not mean that I'm actually doing so. But I believe this. I believe the desire to please you does in fact please you. I hope I never persist in anything apart from that desire. I know that if I do this, you will never leave me to face my troubles all alone." Now, if a guy who just spent 13 years seeking God's will, mute, in a monastery, doesn't know God's will, I'm not liable to find it tonight by midnight. But we can all aim towards it. We all have God's will speaking to us through people around us. I don't mean to decry some of these things, but so many of us are perfectionists, and we think to stay sober you have to be perfect, and you don't have to be perfect, and you don't have to be religious. You have to do these things. You must maintain certain spiritual principles, and these principles are laid down in Alcoholics Anonymous, not in your church. It always irritates me in a sense when Sunday morning, many times at conventions, they say, "This is our spiritual meeting." Sunday morning, spiritual meeting. Wednesday afternoon meetings are just as spiritual as Sunday morning meetings. Thursday morning meetings are spiritual. Every meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous is a spiritual meeting. Because churches meet on Sunday morning, we'd like to think that Sunday morning AA meetings are spiritual. But they're not. They're all spiritual. Because they deal with people like you and me, who of ourselves cannot stay sober. And here we find through the voice of God, even though we don't always know it, because it speaks through other people. And it's kind of an irony when you're new around here to discover that if God speaks directly to you, you better watch out. Because he's going to tell you some bad things. Quit your job and have a beer. Remember, God told me once to quit my job and punch the guy right in the face, and I did. And later on, I was talking to someone about, it seemed to me, I think the message was, do not quit your job and punch the guy in the face, but I missed the first part. That's all. That's why we have one another. That's why we join together. And it's a very unusual thing. It's so unusual, and yet many like me, and if you're new tonight, there's few who are new in their first year, take it for granted. Last night after I got done talking, I was sitting in the coffee room having a cup of coffee briefly, and a couple guys went over to me and said, "What are those Washingtons you were talking about tonight? Was George Washington in AA?" And I said, "No, that wasn't George Washington. What I'd mentioned briefly is that there was a thing called the Washingtonians." So, pardon me, we have such excellent speakers. I want to take just 10 minutes, if I may, and explain to new people why we read some of the stuff we read. Then I'll get out of your way. But in all the history of mankind, 4,000 years, there's only been 2 brief periods where there's ever been a place where there have been groups of sober alcoholics. All the rest of the time they die or go mad. Always, 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 or remain confined. Now you know about one of these brief periods because you happen to be born in that window. That's one of the few things we all have in common. We've all been born in the window to get here, because people born 50 years ahead of us have very little chance. People born 75 years of us had no chance. We are in a window here. And there's one other window where there was a group. And that was a funny thing. In 1840, the first half of the last century was the heaviest drinking period in all of American history. Nobody knows why, per capita. And 6 old drunks were sitting in a bar in Baltimore. One had just gotten out of jail. And he was back to his friends and explaining to them that, the judge or minister or somebody said, he really wondered why I couldn't stop drinking. And he said he understood how I felt. And he said, he didn't understand how I feel. Nobody understands how I feel. You 5 guys are the only guys I know of who understand how I feel. And they said, "Oh, you're the only guy who knows how we feel." Go. And they said, maybe, somehow, if we all took a vow amongst ourselves, we could all stay sober. Okay. So these 6 little guys formed a little agreement not to drink. And everybody laughed. They can't keep themselves sober. Now they're going to keep each other sober. They're drunken old boobs. And they hung in there, and they helped each other, and they talked to each other, and they stayed sober. And a couple of other guys got involved, and a couple other, they weren't alcoholics, they were drunkards at that time. And some other drunkards came over, and pretty soon some guy from Philadelphia heard about it, and he had 3 or 4 little guys going in Philadelphia, and then they had a little group in Washington, and pretty soon they had a bunch of little people going, and that's why they named it the Washingtonians, because no one had ever heard of drunkards helping drunkards before. It was the first of a kind. So they named themselves after George Washington, the first president, first of his kind. So they became the Washington Society. At the end of the year, they had a bunch of little things. At the end of 2 years, they had grown considerably. They were in most of the states. They were in South Carolina. They were in North Carolina. They were through the upper Midwest. And in fact, what they did in the winter, at the end of 1841, they wrote to all these people and said, people don't understand what we're doing and think we're kind of strange. Have somebody, we're going to take Washington's birthday, February 22nd is our anniversary, and have somebody from your community who's not an alcoholic or a drunkard come in and talk to you, and not so much for their talk, but they'll see that we are really not staying well. So all over the country on February 22nd, 1842, they had speakers come in. In fact, in Springfield, Illinois, oddly enough, they had a young lawyer come in who nobody had ever heard of much, a guy named Abraham Lincoln, and he spoke to the Washingtonians. I have his speech on the wall of my office. It's if you ever read through the book of his speeches, you find his speech. Very interesting, because he was no drunkard at all, but he seemed to have some perception of it. He said something to the effect of, you all have this terrible thirst. I don't understand it. I know if I had that thirst, I would be here with you. I don't have that thirst. But it's so unusual because you seem to be so sensitive and you seem to feel things so intensely, and combined with this thirst, it's amazing that you're not having to be drunkards, continue to be drunkards. Well, let's continue. They got some 2 or 3 or 4 guys in who were really great speakers. They went around and have big speaking engagements, and they established something kind of like AA. I mean, they people from this group would go talk to that group, and they had speakers who'd go from this city to that city. They have articles in the paper about them. They didn't have any anonymity or anything like that. They got involved in some money deals. But when a drunkard needed help, they'd send some of the drunkards to go and talk to the guy. By 1845, the bottom estimate of the Washingtonian movement was 250,000 sober drunkards. And many thought it was much more than that. Now, that doesn't seem terribly impressive, perhaps, until you stop and think, after 5 years, AA maybe had 1,000. And that's with communication and magazine articles and everything. They just had a lot. Then they did something. They were having some problems. They were having some conflicts. But then they decided to do something that seems reasonable because people want to do it today in AA. They've always wanted to do it. If we could help drunkards, shouldn't we be able to use our help and help all kinds of people? Help people with other problems. Help people who have narcotic problems, who don't have alcohol problems, now not crack and heroin like today, but then it was opium and laudanum, things like that. And we should help people with emotional problems, even though they're not drunkards. We should help people who have religious questions. We can help them with our spiritual, because we're a unit. And they took in a whole bunch of their members became members of the National Temperance Union, where they're going to stamp out the use of alcohol. They had some little chapter that's working on the Mexican-American War, trying to get a war started with Mexico so we could get Texas. They got a group of all kinds of things. And they put this massive force of goodness behind these people, and they began having conflicts. A couple of their big speakers got drunk and were in terrible shape. Little by little it started to fray. By 1848, the Washingtonians were extinct. And with very few exceptions, all of those hundreds of thousands of drunkards died drunk on the street. I got a book home written in 1862 by one of the very few survivors. He writes about all the things they've done, and he can't understand why they broke up. He said, just as we had an opportunity to help more people, it's as though people went away. Don't know why. I'll tell you how extinct they became. Now we jump ahead 100 years to the early 1940s. Bill Wilson, Dr. Bob, a few followers, got this thing called AA going. They're starting, and they've written a book. This book was written, 12 steps in place, and they were starting to have some real problems. People were starting to get drunk at a rapid rate, and people were having a lot of beefs. I mean, such things as, for example, Bill Wilson's right-hand man, his closest friend in New York, in whose office this book was dictated. He got the feeling that Bill Wilson had screwed him around a little bit, and he got drunk. And he spent the next 2 years going to newcomers, groups all over New York, and saying, Bill Wilson is a liar and a cheat, and if you follow him, you'll get drunk the way I did. That's tough. And people were upset with Bill Wilson. People in Chicago would not communicate with Bill Wilson. They'd only go to communicate with Dr. Bob in Akron. People in Los Angeles wouldn't communicate with Akron. They only communicated with New York. All over the country, people fighting. My favorite, I guess, of all time was the guy in Florida who did something that sounds terrible, really was good. They wrote him on and said, how dare you charge for AA membership down there in Florida? And he said, well, it's down in Florida. If you give people something for nothing, they won't pay any attention to it. If they pay for it, they'll listen. And I send them in New York, and so it sounded good, It's just all sorts of things. But by the mid-1940s, AA were starting to fall apart. There were more people getting drunk than were getting sober. And a guy in North Carolina, wrote Bill Wilson a letter, I guess at the end of 1944. He said, Bill, we're going to go the way of the Washingtonians. We're going to be all done. And to tell you how extinct the Washingtonians were, Bill Wilson had never heard of them. And the most successful treatment ever in the history of the world. And he had to go dig out some literature. And he dug it out and found out about it. And he's answering all these letters from people all over. And he's talking to Dr. Bob from time to time. And he didn't know what to do. And he thought, I would have to do something rather dramatic to save this organization because it's so wonderful, and yet we're losing people and nobody knows why. So he sat down, and over a brief period of time, he did everything he knew how to do to save Alcoholics Anonymous. He sat down and he wrote the 12 traditions. It's hard to remember that. Most people think the traditions came out when the book came out. Not at all. The traditions came out much later. The traditions were in answer to thousands of people drinking and dying. In fact, the 12 traditions, in a real sense, were based even more on the Washingtonian experience than on the AA experience, because it had gone along further about anonymity and not getting involved in politics and not getting involved in other things and staying in treatment of alcoholics. But the same things would happen. Now, he wrote them in the long form. Some of you have never read the long form, but in the back of this book, in the appendices, where they have the 12 traditions, on one side is the short form, which we heard read tonight. One's the long form, which is really the way they were written and makes them more, it fleshes them out. A lot of people never heard of them. In our group in Los Angeles, we read the long form once a month because we want everybody to know what they're about. We read the short form the rest of the time. But he introduced the long form of the traditions to you and me in the grapevine over a period of time, one by one. And I'm happy to say, knowing that alcoholics are what they are, it met with tremendous rejection by the membership. We don't want these stinking rules. We've come here to find love. And of course, that started another fight. They were fighting over the traditions now, and just everything going to hell. And so Bill and Dr. Bob, they always got along. Their followers hated each other. New York Sharpies, Akron shit kickers, So they got together, and they decided maybe we could have a big meeting somewhere where a lot of our followers could get together and realize that we're all trying to do the same thing. We got to save AA because there's a lot of people yet to come. All the people in this room, for example. And so they had their followers decide to set up a big meeting. And the people in Akron with true alcoholic maturity said, we'll go to a meeting, but we won't go to New York. And the people in New York, not to be outdone, said, we'll go to a meeting, but not to Akron. So they got together one more time and made a Solomon-like decision. We'll go to Cleveland. Okay. So on July 4th weekend, 1950, the first major assemblage of alcoholics in the history of the world took place in Cleveland, Ohio. And that's an interesting convention. Dr. Bob gave his last talk. Some of you remember that. If you haven't read that, you should read it, because he was dying of cancer, had to be helped to the podium. He was dying of cancer, and he wanted to, in just a few minutes, try to succinctly as he could explain everything he'd learned in his 15 years of sobriety. In that talk, he talks about keeping things simple and leaving things of complexity to the scientists who are interested in such things. That is not what AA is about. He says, AA is love and service. We all know what love is, and we all know what service is. We don't need definitions. Then he said that other great thing. He said, let us never be too busy to stop and give the man behind us a pat on the back and a helping hand, because none of us would be here if someone hadn't done it for us. And then the last thing he said was certainly as true today as it was then. He said, let us guard that erring member, the tongue, which, as we know, causes more destruction and pain than anything else in Alcoholics Anonymous. And they helped him down from the podium, and he died a few months thereafter. It's an interesting thing. At that convention, Bill Wilson had talked on Friday night, and they all liked it. And then they decided the convention was such a success, they decided to have another one in 5 years. So they had another one 5 years later in St. Louis. And Bill Wilson told a story at Friday night. Next, 1960 was in Long Beach. Were you down there, Don? And there it was the same thing. And that was the first convention I went to. I was about a year and a half sober. I didn't have any front teeth. I didn't want to go there. A bunch of people all doing well. My sponsor did not seem to hear when I said I didn't choose to go. So I went down there. It's kind of, they were a lot looser than they are now. There's a bunch of us milling outside the Long Beach football stadium. They come out and say, we need a few ushers. Can we have a few ushers? And I wanted to get away from these happy, successful people. A bunch of malcontents came in, and they said, now, when old people or handicapped people come in the door, take them. We'll let them in first, and you help them to a seat. All right? I snatched off the first old lady through the door, took her down to the front on the aisle, sat down, took off my usher armband, sat next to her, had the best seat in the house. And that was some kind of a meeting, I'll tell you. Bill Wilson told a story. He introduced his sponsor, who gave his only convention talk ever, Ebby talked, and who drank again after that, could not stay sober before that, could not stay sober after that, but he was sober that period for a few years. And in the course of that weekend, we heard from Lois and Sam Shoemaker and Sister Ignatia. I was just, living history, I'll tell you, boy. And I'll tell you, it brought tingles. Bill Wilson gave a story, talked at length. It touched me. It turned me around. I had tears in my eyes. I left there, and I was a changed man. I didn't go back to being rotten for 2 weeks. I'll tell you, I was a goer. And this went on again in 1975 and in Denver, 1980. In New Orleans, 1985 in Montreal. Many of us were there for the 50th anniversary, 1990 in Seattle. And as most of you know, 1995 will be in San Diego, and I hope most of you will come, and I hope to see you there. But at the 1970 convention in Miami Beach, getting together Friday night to hear Bill Wilson's annual talk. Got about 25,000 people in that big auditorium. Were you there, Don? Just exciting as it could be. And the guy comes out just before the meeting starts. There's just mass of people. I have some bad news for you. Bill Wilson is too ill to speak, because we knew he had emphysema, and now apparently was dying from it. He says he will not be able to speak tonight. And you just heard 15 or 20,000 people go, oh. We said, we do have a substitute. They introduced some poor bastard. Hi. And we all, it's your fault. We didn't say it, but we thought it at him. Taught him a good lesson. They gave a good talk, I guess, if you were listening. But we were walking back to the hotel afterwards. I was walking with an old guy named John McHugh from Pittsburgh. I said, "Isn't that sad, John?" He got sober under Dr. Bob. And I said, "We'll never hear Bill again." I said, "We'll hear Bill again." I said, "No, he's got emphysema. He can't even breathe. He won't talk anymore." They told me that in the World Service Office. He'll talk at this convention, kid. I just know it. I said, "You're crazy, John." So I thought, well, maybe Saturday he'll talk. But he didn't talk on Saturday. And Sunday morning, the last big meeting, all of us back at the auditorium, this has got to be the time. But they introduced a regular speaker, and he got up and talked. And we all, About halfway through his talk, a guy came out and tugged on his arm. I would interrupt my talk. I have some wonderful news. Bill Wilson is here behind that curtain in a wheelchair. Ambulance has just brought him. And he wants to say a few words. And God, we all jumped up and clapped, and the organist played Climb Every Mountain, and we all cried. To prove that sobriety had reduced our emotionals. And they brought him out, and he pulled himself up. He had tubes in his nose and all over him. And, I don't know if you ever heard, you can hear the tape. He starts off by saying, "I'm so happy to be here, and this wonderful work that will continue as long as God wants us to do it," to that effect. And then it sounds as though something happens to the tape, like the tape broke. It wasn't. It was him. He ran out of air. And he said, "I want you all to know very low now." And they wheeled him away in the wheelchair, and that was his last talk he ever gave, and he died a few months later. And I was walking back to the hotel with John McHugh that day. I said, "John, how in the hell did you know that Bill Wilson was going to talk? Nobody in the World Service Office knew he was going to talk. How would you know? They wouldn't tell you." He said, "Kid, you got to remember, you're dealing with human beings. Inspired human beings, but human beings. Do you think Bill Wilson would want it said that Dr. Bob talked while he was dying and Bill wouldn't?" That really is true. And that's a true story. And he did. But at this 1950 convention, to get back to that, they introduced the traditions. They had 6 guys get up there, and each took 2 traditions. I have the tapes of this convention. They're hard to hear, but they're really inspiring. And they try to explain, this is not rules. These are not trying to hurt you. This is to save us. These are to save us. And one of the great telling points is we have no way to enforce them. If you don't want to do them, you don't have to, but we're trying to show you how to save yourself. I always thought that was a mistake myself. I always thought, for instance, we should have people in AA who help people. For example, in my area, I'm known as a dictator-type sponsor. I don't want to be, but that's the way I was trained by a vicious man many years ago. And say, "You're a dictator." But, there's no such a thing as a dictatorship sponsor in AA without the absolute consent of the dictatee. Because all he ever has to say is, "Screw you," and the dictatorship is over. And I've always thought we should have some AA police maybe who could come in the night and say, "Did you say screw you to your sponsor? Come with us." But they convinced this crowd that there was no enforcement. This was to save us. And that day, in 1950, they voted the traditions in, and the next time they printed the book, which was a year later, they wound up in here. And it's hard to remember if you're kind of new. These traditions just sound like something, they use them at meetings to see if newcomers can pronounce autonomous. It sometimes is. That's all it is. Let's have Billy read it. Autonomous. Yeah. But I want to tell you something. In my opinion, in the opinion of many people much smarter than me, the traditions are much more important than the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's a hard thing to remember. Because the steps are an individual thing. If I don't do the steps, I may get drunk. But if we don't protect the traditions, we may all get drunk. And we better keep a place here, because the purpose of The purpose of Alcoholics Anonymous, really, we must remember, is not to be on the cutting edge of psychobabble, but rather to take the only thing that has ever consistently been effective for the treatment of people like you and me in the history of the world. There's been one other time they did it, and they changed it, and they went down the toilet. And that's why we have to be fuddy-duddy sometimes in our groups and say, if you're not an alcoholic, you cannot be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. They say, why do you say that for? You can read in the little folder written by Bill Wilson called Problems Other Than Alcohol. And it has a question and answer format. It says, Bill, can a member who is not can a person who is not an alcoholic be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous? He says, no, they cannot. Should we make him think he's a member? No, we should not. Can we have a member who's an alcoholic but has other problems, drugs or other things? Absolutely, as long as you're an alcoholic. And why is it so important to be an alcoholic? Why is this such an important thing? And it's under great fire all the time, but never so much as it is now, because there's so many narcotics addicts coming in. And other people who can understand that. And well-meaning, soft-hearted people say, we can't ask people to leave just because they're not alcoholics. And it's hard to realize, I mean, they're welcome to come to open meetings. If you're here tonight, you're welcome to come here. But you cannot be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous for a very simple reason. Alcoholics Anonymous and the Washingtonians have only one thing in common, one main thing. They are successful because they depend upon one alcoholic talking to another alcoholic, which is the only force for most cases where you can reduce the feelings of difference that put up the wall that keep people like us. There's no, this information here is great. No doubt about it. It's wonderful. In fact, this information has been around in one form or another in many books for hundreds of years, thousands of years. A lot of that stuff is in the Bible. Isn't that stuff in all sorts of places? But it has never been effective for people like us. And I have to remember why, by looking at myself. Today I see, I'm in a position different than most of you. I see alcoholics die on a continuing basis. I was thinking about that today when Tom was talking. He was put in prison, and then he later became a warden. I was thrown out of the Skid Row mission, and I came back to run it. If we'd have been thrown out of the White House, we'd have been president now, Tom. Well, might not be such a bad idea. We don't discuss politics in AA or religion or sex. Once upon a time, a long time ago, I heard a guy say, there are three things we don't discuss in AA: sex, politics, or religion. But I do want to say something about that damn Catholic senator hitting on all them girls. Well, he died later. And I sometimes see these guys dying, and I see people dying in front of me, and I mean, like many people in this program, I travel around a lot, and I'm asked to come and speak places, and people write me letters, say thank you, and I get a letter from a woman in New Delhi, India, saying your tape really helped me, and someone else in some other country. And I see people I know and care for dying in front of me. Why can't the big communicator help them? Someone who I care about. Because of one thing. He is trapped, or she is trapped, in this wall of difference. But my case is different. I think the most lethal, I think that's what kills alcoholics. As far as I'm concerned, that's the major, maybe the only death cause of alcoholics. Because this stuff works if you will do it. But you and I all know, most of us at least, that I don't want to do it until I know it will work for me. And it doesn't work for people like me. It works for people like you whose problem is alcohol. And I look at these people, I say, come on, I want to just shake them. And I stop and think, if it were that easy, why didn't I learn it? I'm reasonably bright. Why did I have the worst years of my life after I came to AA? Year after year after year, slipping in jails and hospitals and suicide attempts. And all this time I knew practically as much about AA as I did after I got sober for a year. I'd read the book, I had good sponsors, and why didn't it work? because my case is different. And even when your case is different, and you got to change, even out, you can't always change then, but it's the only chance you got. And I was driven over a period of time. The last day I drank, I was thrown out of a Skid Row mission. And I tried to explain to him. He said, "Stay out of here, you damn bum." And I tried to explain to him, "I'm not a bum. 3 years ago, I was on the faculty of the University of Texas. Ads that I helped write, the old L.C. Delmer ads for the Borden Company, were running that very week in Life and Time and Collier's and Saturday Evening Post. I've had my picture in the New York Times for achievement." How many people do you know have had their picture in the New York Times for achievement? But it's hard to explain these things in midair. You soar across the sidewalk. And I'd had my front teeth kicked out a month before that in the Phoenix drunk tank. I wasn't hitting those consonants quite as clean. I should say one thing. I spent several years in psychoanalysis when I was slipping in AA. And a lot of people say you shouldn't be grateful. I was very grateful for it. So the morning I woke up in the Phoenix jail and the guy was kicking my front teeth out. I was so sick I couldn't move my head out of the shoe. I was almost instantly able to identify his problem. I remember thinking, this son of a bitch is overreacting. If I'd known what I learned later, I could have also said, "Did you come from a broken home? Are you a victim like me?" But I stood outside of the midnight mission, and I'd been drinking for a long time, and I'd done a lot of things. And if a guy had come up to me and said, "You know, you're dying, Slim, don't you think you might contemplate you might be an alcoholic?" And if my life depended on it, as it did, I'd have to say, "But I'm not. You don't really understand." And if they said, "Why don't you think you're an alcoholic?" I could not have given an answer. I would not have an answer. Now I know the answer. I know what I was thinking then, but I couldn't put it in words because I've seen it in so many other people. And the answer's pretty much always the same. The reason I know I'm not an alcoholic is this. I know what alcoholics are, and I know what AA is. Alcoholics are people who, when they get drinking, their emotions get screwed up, their lives get very painful, they have terrible times. They go to a place like AA, they get sober, they get straightened out, their emotions get peaceful again, their lives get okay. And I know that to be true because over the years I've gone to a lot of meetings and hear people say that. I used to be bad, I used to drink, I used to lost all these things, and now I'm feeling well, now I'm doing good. And I don't have any doubt for it at all. I have sat in bars with guys who have left an AA meeting, we all sat there and drank, and explained why we're different, but we admired the people who were in the meeting who were like that. And I look the same, and I drink the same, and I have much the same reactions. But there's one very significant difference that I could never put my finger on until much later, but I could do it now. In some strange way I can't explain, I'm 180 degrees different. It is when I stay sober that my emotions get screwed up and my life gets painful. And I don't drink to drink. I drink to feel the way they feel when they're sober. And sometimes I drink too much. And then well-meaning people say, "Oh, you've got an alcohol problem, son. You ought to go to some place like Alcoholics Anonymous and you get straightened out." And when you listen to that advice, you usually have to agree because you're in a bad situation. Thank you. But inside a visceral voice just screams, "But you don't understand. You don't understand. My case is different. I don't know what it is." And it started to rain that morning, and I walked 71 blocks out to the corner of Wilshire and Fairfax. Didn't want to particularly do it, but I was going to get busted on that street, and I couldn't go to the bus depot. They were arresting them in the bus depot. So I went to this AA club that I'd been asked to leave a week before for hanging around there drunk. And I went in there, and I hung around there, and I hated it. More people doing well, rah-rah, enthusiasts, kind of people that have no understanding of an intelligent person. Well, it's easy for you to laugh. You have no idea what it's like. The kind of person, And I had no idea that Halloween morning, that would be my last drink till now. I didn't know why. I didn't plan for it to be. I didn't want to be sober. Being sober is destructive to me. I had no intention to stay sober. What I wanted to get was someplace where I'd make a score, maybe get a front teeth, go to some big city where I wasn't known, get a job as a writer again, and be on top. I'd lost my wife. I'd lost my children. My parents weren't writing to me. Okay, I'll make it on my own. To hell with them. And I hung around the damn club. I'm sure every long-term slipper sooner or later looks back and thinks, what happened? What changed? What was different this time? Why am I sober 36 years instead of being dead or in an insane asylum? What was the change? And you'd like to know that because you'd like to be able to communicate it. Because of my dreadful checkered past in and out of AA, I get a lot of bad people referred to me. You're so sick, I'm going to send you to that damn Clancy. And some of you know, Hank knows, at least on 2 or 3 occasions over the years, the doorbell will ring at 1 in the morning, and I'll come slogging in my jammies. There'll be some fool there saying, they said you'd help me. I said, who said that? He said, wouldn't give me his name. You see a car speeding away across. Come back here! Well, almost anybody, I'm sure, that's ever had any problems with AA would like to find a way to communicate. But not ringing the bells, Quasimodo, have you? Didn't hear him. Oh, the 9 o'clock, yes, that's right. Because all of us have been sober a while know that there comes a moment, and I don't know how you get it, I don't know how you explain it, where you suddenly feel, I can stay sober. It's a funny feeling. You just take it for granted, I suppose, after a while. The only thing I can equate it to is the feeling that, that feeling is the feeling you'd like to communicate to somebody. Here's how you get that feeling. And there's no way to communicate it. And the analogy I think of is, there's nobody here who can give their children, when they teach them how to ride a bicycle, you can't give them a sense of balance. You can give them a bicycle, you can show them how, you can show them how to move their legs, but when they get on the bicycle, boom, down they go. I don't want to do that anymore. Yes, you do. But everybody knows that feeling. And you fall down and you cry, and it's no fun, and I hate it. And in one moment, somewhere along the line, you suddenly get a sense of balance. You can't explain how, but you can ride a bicycle for the rest of your life. Or you can ride a motorcycle, you can ride anything if it takes you balance. And how do you do it? But you still can't tell your child that you love. Here, let me get on the bike and try it. And it's much the same way this feeling of sobriety. I know it, and I can talk about it for years, but I can't give it to a guy who doesn't understand what I'm talking about. He doesn't have it. All he says, I can't stay here, my case is different. And he may agree with me and nod with me, but in his eyes I just can see, your lips tell me yes, yes, but there's no in your eyes, baby. And we all know people, and we all see people like that. And I think, what was different in my life? What changed that? I had no illusion I was going to stay sober, and I didn't even want to stay sober. The only time I'd ever stayed sober in my life, right like the time, I had a son die when I was in jail one night. It wasn't a big jail term, just the wrong night to be in jail. And I felt I don't know if I ever felt any worse than that. My father came down and told me about it, and I could hardly stand it. I almost went crazy. But I had taken a little vow in his little casket secretly that this would never happen in our family again. I would never be drunk and gone if anybody needed me. And I was drinking pretty good and going pretty good, and somebody, I think, mentioned to me, my wife perhaps, that I don't get out of hand. I remember what happened when you were with John, and that made me very upset. But I suddenly realized that's true. I could be in jail again, because I'd been in jail a couple of times down there, just overnight. So I went on the wagon. I thought to myself, I'm doing this because I took a vow on my son John's casket. And I was holding 2 jobs. Daytime's an advertising agency, and I was on the faculty of this university. And I loved my children, but they'd moved in and they were loud and noisy, and it seemed to me, and it was hot down there, and wind blows in West Texas, and dirt in the air, and strange ethics. And I needed a drink so bad I could scream. I could just scream. I couldn't sleep, couldn't do anything. But I'd taken a vow in my son's casket. You can't violate that no matter what. So one day my wife took the kids to church, as she was her wont. She was religious. And I pulled the car in the garage, hooked up a hose in the exhaust pipe, and got in the car and turned the motor and went to sleep and died. I'd rather be dead than be like this. I can't stand it. And a neighbor watched this. I guess he noticed I didn't come out, and he kicked down the door and pulled me out, briefly dead, pounded on my chest and breathed in my mouth. And they oxygenated me at the hospital and talked to me, determined I was mentally ill, and moved me to this locked psycho ward, and it examined me and determined I was a paranoid schizophrenic, and committed me for an indefinite period, up to the rest of my life, conceivably, to the Texas State Insane Asylum in Big Spring, Texas. And there was no alcohol on my commitment papers. I was a certified psychotic patient. Now that's how I get when I stay sober, folks. You know, that's not what I'm looking for, really. I've said this many times. I may do it someday. I would like to go down to Texas someday and find that psychiatrist that diagnosed me as a schizophrenic, as a dual personality. He must be about 90 now. I could move him around pretty good, you know. Hey, you quack! How dare you diagnose me as a dual personality? Christ, if I could have got my personalities down to 2, I'd have made it. My problem has always been this group that forms in my head at the drop of a hat. What do you think we ought to do? Let's get out of here. I don't think we can. What do you think? What do they look? When I was sober about 3 or 4 years, there was a rash of people in my part of the country who were going to therapy. They'd say things to me like, I'm not sure AA is enough for me. I think perhaps I need group therapy. I remember thinking to myself, Christ, I don't need to go anywhere for that. I just got to go for a ride alone in my car. You know. You know, that's what... But there was no hope for me. I said this once upon a time, and I mean it truly. I work with a lot of down and outers now. I see people come into my office who are dying, literally dying. And I hope I can help them. I get a lot of people referred to me who are bad people who don't sobriety even. That's all right. Give them a chance. But I sometimes think, what would I do if Clancy Imislund, circa 1958, came into my office today? I thought about that. A smart aleck with a good education who wants to debate everything, who wants to give a lot of mouth, who thinks he's smarter than everybody and thinks he's being victimized by their life, and on. What could I do to help such a guy? And I really don't know what I could do to help such a man, because he'd give me a lot of crap, and I wouldn't take it very long from a smart mouth, without front teeth and just a nasty little smart mouth, bad mouther. And I think I don't know how to handle people like that. I really don't. I'm glad that I'm glad that I found someone better than me to go to. I hung around that damn club, and as we were talking about in the sponsorship thing, eventually I hung in there for a little while. I got a sponsor. They wanted you to get a sponsor. Get a sponsor. So I got this sponsor who turned out to be a very strongly structured man who intimidated me and who made me do things. And I began to take actions little by little that I hated, and I wound up doing things that were just terrible. But there was no place to go, and I had no front teeth. I just got a job as a busboy, got fired, and I got a job as stuffing envelopes, and I lost that for inadequacy. And I got a job just... But little by little, he took advantage of my pain to save my life. When I was coming in... I was going to say when I was coming into Myrtle Beach, that's not true. When I was coming into Atlanta on the airplane, coming into Myrtle Beach on the airplane, all I thought about was this sumbitch going to make it, you know. I said to the stewardess, can't you go any faster than this? She says, yes, I can, but I got to stick with the plane, don't I? Well. Hey, they had some black crepe in the washroom on this plane. I thought, this must be in honor of the people who were killed. And she said, no, that's our roller towel. Yeah. I don't know why I started talking. I didn't intend to say any of those things. I'm sorry. When I was coming into Atlanta, as I sometimes think, you think about those big jets. They're pushing at 550 miles an hour all the way across the continent. And then you land, and there's not a hell of a lot of airports. I hope they got good brakes, too. We're moving pretty fast. And actually what happens is that they don't count on the brakes. They reverse the thrust of the engines. The very same thrust that makes you go fast makes you stop. And in a real sense, that's what Alcoholics Anonymous, I think the therapy of Alcoholics Anonymous is, in a sense, and sponsorship. It takes the very same sober pain that happens to alcoholics, and it's really a terribly sober pain because it's an immature pain, because it comes about as a result of evading maturity by finding solutions in an unnatural reaction to alcohol. But so there's a lot of pain when you're trying to stay sober. And if you allow it, that very same, we talk about it, it's true, that very same pain, what makes you get drunk? When you say there's no further use, what's the use? To hell with it, A doesn't work, bum, 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 and drink. But if you allow someone to steer that pain, they can take that same pain and use it to make you take actions that you would never take in 1,000 years left on your own judgment. Most of the things that saved my life, I took as the request of, not at the behest of terrible pain. One thing I never was going to do is write an inventory, because I take my inventory to the psychiatrist. And the day I lost my job as a dishwasher, I thought, well, I can't hold a job as a dishwasher, might as well be dead. I started to walk to the ocean, and I couldn't make it, and my sponsor called up my sponsor, and he cursed me and screamed at me and got me so upset. That day I came out, I wrote an inventory. And a week later I read it to the old fool. And I'll tell you something. That same pain would have guaranteed me death or drunk. But that same pain, when steered, enabled me to do something I don't know that I'd ever have done, because I was absolutely against it. Many of the things that I was talking about last night in sponsorship, most of the things, meaningful things I did to me was through pain. My number one amend, make it to your father. I hate my father. When I think about him, I want to kill him. That's why we're going to start making amends to him. There's no way in the world he took that pain and steered it, and on and on and on. Because it turns out that action is what changes us here. Until we take certain actions, our perceptions make it impossible for us to do what is here, I think. This slogan back here, into action, means that you can get all the philosophy you want. You can sit in philosophy forever. And this stuff really works. But there's a wall that keeps me from doing it till my perceptions change, my ability to accept direction, my ability to do things I don't believe in and don't agree with. That's the hardest single thing to do here. Stopping drinking is fine, but if you think that's the goal, that isn't. That's the beginning. Being sober is the entrance to AA. Being sober is nothing. It is what you do after you come here and discover the natural, terrible stage of alcoholism. The most painful part of alcoholism is sobriety. That's why drinkers like you and me, sooner or later, always drink again. Always drink again or sedate. Now, we can't drink. We can't stay sober. And there's a name for that, and it isn't an alcohol problem. It's called alcoholism. And there's only one chance. Somehow, I got to stay sober. But I can't stay sober because my perception of reality is so bad I can't stand it. So I must take actions I don't believe in that will what? Little by little, change my perception of reality. As far as I can tell, I have never really changed over the years, from the days of my last drunk. But taking certain actions here under duress has little by little shaped everybody else up. Just, you get them up to tolerable, and if you don't go to meetings for a while, they know it, and they all act badly again. He's not going to meetings, let's drive funny. The perception of reality. And that's the alteration of reality. And that's what so often we think getting sober. Peg and I were talking again last night. an old example I used years ago. But people today going to come into AA and get sober, why go to AA when you go to a nice place like a treatment facility where you can really get professional help? And the analogy I always think is if I were going to Los Angeles, going down the beach, and I want to go to Catalina, which is beyond the horizon. Now just say, here's a neat little skiff with a guy in a white suit and nice smells of food coming out of the galley saying, won't you come with us? We're the SS Treatment Center, and we'll take care of you and it'll be fine. That's a good idea. What's that down there? Here's two guys down there milling around. You want to go with us? We're from AA. We got an invisible boat. Not while I still got insurance, Jim. And you get on the treatment center, and it's really true. They do exactly what they promise. They dry you off, they feed you, they clothe you, they give you instructions on what's been happening to you, and it's really wonderful. The only problem with it is this. You just get out of sight of land, and they say, well, we've got to turn back now. Well, what am I supposed to do? Well, you're in good shape. Swim like a sumbitch. And so you swim and you feel pretty good, but pretty soon you get tired. Oh, I'm going to do something. And here come these two boobs in their invisible boat. You want to ride? I'm not that sick. And pretty soon you're about dead. And here they come again. Yes, I'll go. Hop in the boat. There's nothing here. There's no boat. I'm floating in midair. This is crazy. What do you want me to do? Grab an oar and row. Screw you. And finally, you're just about dead. They pull you in. What do you want me to do? Grab an oar and row. You silly bastards. As you the story of Alcoholics Anonymous is this. As you start to row, the boat appears, but it never appears till you start to row. And you row, and pretty soon it starts to appear, and it grows, and it gets pretty, you don't even want to go to Catalina, just stay in the boat. Let's go. Ha, 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 ha. You're good. That's what sponsors are for. They come along once in a while and say, hey, you got your oar upside down. Oh, yes, I could sit there. You know? And the cruel irony of Alcoholics Anonymous is this. If you stop rowing, pretty soon, without even being aware of it, the boat starts to shrink. And one day, thousands of people are back in the water. And they never know what happened. They think, oh, that boat was invisible all along. No, it wasn't. You stopped rowing. That's one of the great reasons we get together in AA. Meetings, we're not here for instruction. You get all the instruction you need without going to a meeting. We go to meetings to really reinforce a sense of identification with other people, for one thing. Secondly, to remind one another to keep rowing, to keep doing the thing, into action. Take the actions of Alcoholics Anonymous that Tom spoke about so well and Peg talked about. And the actions of, and sometimes it takes the form of activity. I know that AA action is not picking up cups. That's activity. But I'll tell you, there are people when they're starting out to that's action. They are taking action. They don't know what the hell, they don't want to do it, so it's a great thing. You want to help set up those chairs? Yeah, no, I don't want to. Will you do it? Yeah. That's action. Action is taking arms against a sea of troubles, as it were. Because the net result is always the same. Because again, I repeat what I said last night. Alcoholics Anonymous, this magical miracle thing, is really what it's always been. One alcoholic talking to another alcoholic to help him reduce his feelings of difference at least enough that he will begin to take actions he does not yet to believe in. By taking these actions little by little, what happens? My perception of reality changes. When I began to stay sober, the only higher power I could comprehend was my sponsor. But as a result of taking actions, my perceptions changed. I came to believe in AA is my higher power. And one day, sometime later, I found myself kneeling down where nobody could see me and trying to say a little prayer because some guy had cursed me into it. And I said a little prayer, and I thought maybe a Norwegian Lutheran God would hear me and say, "Oh, there he is now." What? But he didn't. And I've prayed earnestly every day of my life for over a third of a century. And I don't know if I could not prove to you that any prayer I ever said got out of the room I was in. I don't know if it ever did. I have no evidence. I've never prayed. The only thing I've ever done here, I've never prayed for anything. I prayed for knowledge of God's will for me and the strength to carry it out. I don't have any prayers, but the prayers have always made me feel a little bit stronger. They seem to alter my perception. When I take the actions called upon me, they seem to alter my perception. Little by little. The only way I can tell how I'm doing, many times, the only way I can tell, I've been sober a long time. Not as long as Don and Tom and old timers ruining AA. But what are they doing with that money we're sending to New York anyway? Anyway, but I've been around a long time. I know the ropes pretty well. And I would say, how am I doing? How am I doing? I'm always doing pretty good, really. I am. But they fluctuate. If you want to know how you're doing, see how they're acting. If they're all acting like jerks today, you need help. If they're all right, you're okay. And you little by little learn to control your actions. You can't always control your emotions, control your actions. The example I always use, the things I've learned in AA since changing my perception. I no longer, when someone cuts me off on the freeway, for example, in Los Angeles, which they do, I no longer have to chase them beyond my exit. If I haven't caught them by 4th Street, I see you again, Red Baron. Sometimes there's an exception to that. A little girl cut me off a few years ago, almost put me in an overpass, almost killed me. And I pursued her. Of course, when you pursue them, you can't do anything. All you can do is go next to them and go. But I caught her. I went her some couple miles beyond my exit just to give her a triple ray. And I saw her. She's about 17 years old. I got a granddaughter, looks just like her, long blonde hair, who's probably driving somewhere, and some old irascible old puke like me is acting madly. I thought, why do I get like this? I smiled at her, and she went. Almost made me crazy. But that's part of life out there. That's what I have to do. The reason I stay in AA, the reason I stay active. Some people apparently don't have to do this. They retire after a while. I don't. I used to feel sorry for myself. Why can't I be like these people who can stop going to AA and somehow be all right? When I stop going to AA, I get goofy. When I stop doing these things, I get goofy. And I think, sad. But over the years, a lot of those people have had to come to me and say, how do I get back into AA? And I've been here. I'm so glad that force is out there keeping me centered, because I'm not a good man by nature, nor am I really a good man. I am not a fine person, basically, who drank a little too much. I'm a rationalizing and a justifier and a liar and a cheat. All I want to do is get along, and I'll do whatever's necessary to do it. And somehow here, that is not become necessary on a daily basis to do that. So if you're kind of new tonight, I would suggest you get the tapes of this conference, because you'll have heard some excellent talks. As I said, you'll hear Willie talk about steps and traditions, how they fit into our lives. You'll hear Peg, who gave an excellent talk. It was so intense. If I look at her, I think it's miraculous she stays sober. I've talked at her 25th birthday in Omaha and her 30th birthday. Every time I see her, surrounded by the dozens of women she sponsors who just idolize her. And think, what is this crazy woman doing, the idol of all these people? And I know what's inside of her. You newcomers don't. But that's the whole thing. You become what she looks like. And this morning you'll hear Cricket's talk, which is an intense and hard and truthful and open, shattering talk. And you'll hear this afternoon, Tom gives a fine talk, great talk, one of my favorite speakers, always identify that going from the prison to the street and somehow making it. And tomorrow morning you'll hear Don, who is as active and done. He has transformed his part of the country. I never saw anything like it. He has transformed. Fargo Moorhead is a pocket of enthusiasm that isn't approached within 1,000 miles in any direction. It's just, and some of his goofs are right behind him. Like tonight, well, it wasn't very far. We just drove down here. Good guys. Whenever you see them, and they're great. Get these tapes and listen to them. But the number one lesson you got to remember is this. You want to help. You want to make sure that you don't want to change AA before it has a chance to change your perception. You hear a lot about therapy. You hear psychobabble. You hear all sorts of crap about victimization. All that may be true, but if you want to talk about that, go to the meetings where they sell that stuff. Go to ACA. Go to inner child meetings. Don't bring it here. We discuss recovery from that stuff, and that's why we do it with certain steps and with identification. You got to keep AA because I'll tell you. I would think if you're like me, I have a granddaughter now who works at MTV in New York. She's about 24, and she's hip and slick and cool, and her mother's an A and I'm an A, so I assume that she may be an A. I hope when she comes here, maybe 5 years from now or 20 years from now, she'll walk into a meeting where they're talking about the steps, not about psychobabble, not about the inner meaning of your inner child. I don't care about that. All I want to know is there's got to be a place where people like you and me can go. That's why we do these things. That's why we gather here. That's why we share our experience, strength, and hope. We use the steps. We go home to our home groups and we protect the traditions even though it might not make us popular. It is more important that AA succeeds than that I look good to some jerk who isn't going to be here next month anyway. And I want to stay... All during this convention, you heard these people get up. We don't do it where I live. Where I live, we get up and say, my name is Clancy and I'm an alcoholic. They don't do it here. They get up and say, my name is Fred. I first heard it in the Texas Nut House where I went to meetings first. Guy said, my name is Fred and I'm an alcoholic. And through the grace of God and the power of this simple program, it has not been necessary me to drink any alcohol or take any mind-sedating or tranquilizing medication since my sobriety date. And for this, I'm truly grateful. Then they all say, hi, Fred. I thought if I ever got sober long enough, I would give them the facts. I wouldn't give them some cant like that. That was like you heard this weekend. Everybody talked about it. So I want to tell you the real facts based on my life and my experiences for the last 30 years. Here's what I've discovered. I've discovered that my name is Clancy Emerson and I'm an alcoholic. And I've discovered one other thing. I've discovered that through the grace of God and the power of this simple program, it has not been necessary for me to take any alcohol or mind-sedating medications since October the 31st, 1958. And for this, I am truly grateful.